I want to begin by reading a poem called Feral Siddhi, S-I-D-D-H-I, the Sanskrit word that describes a sense of heightened spiritual capacity. I actually found this poem when I was finishing up my sermon, and I felt like it summed up pretty much what I was trying to say. So in case you doze off during the sermon, don't worry. I'm going to give you a synopsis right up front here. It's a poem called Feral Siddhi by Maya Luna. When it smells off, listen. This is a feral city. Primal intuition. No, you're not in resistance to what is. No, you're not blocked. No, this isn't your attachment disorder, or your core wound, or your trauma, or your spiritual immaturity, or your growth edge. No, this is not a projection. This is your innate bodily wisdom, the feminine knowing deeper than the mind. If it smells off, you're right. You can trust yourself. Maybe words can't explain it. That doesn't mean it's not real. It's real. It is real. You are the harvester of wisdom, buried deep in the black of earth. Down, 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 way, way down. You know you feel it. You smell it. It's simple. It's undeniable feminine knowing. You are an animal hunting truth that has no name. When it smells right, eat it. When it smells off, don't. These are the feral cities, the intelligence of womb and belly. She is speaking to you. Listen. Don't be pulled off track by the brilliant web of mind, by the hierarchy of logic, by the labyrinth of stories, by the theories bought and sold. The mind can turn anything into truth. Anything. Anything. So who is to trust? When you don't know where to step, turn to the feral one, the wolf in your bones, the dragon in your belly, the one who knows without hesitation. Like a tiger in the brush knows when to pounce. Primal intuition. Trust yourself. Smell from the depths of crazy knowing. Listen. Receive. Hear what you knew long before you knew you knew. So for those following the ecclesiastical calendar and not the weather, today is the first Sunday of Advent. Advent being the season of preparation for welcoming Christ consciousness into our lives and into our world. The word Advent means the arrival of a notable thing, person, or event. So this morning I want to talk about what is notable about Jesus. What is notable about the Christ consciousness he embodied. Now, unquestionably, there are myriad threads we could pick up here, but this morning I want to talk about authority. I have always been drawn to how the Gospels took note of the authority with which Jesus taught. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all make a point to describe how people were astounded because Jesus taught as one having authority. So this morning, I'm going to attempt to braid the arrival of Christ consciousness Christians celebrate, the divine authority or the feral city that plays a part in this state of consciousness, and the theological expedition I've been on to see how all this stuff plays out for real. Are you ready? You think we can do this? So to pick up where I left off, after living in DC for 3 years, I began feeling the call of the wild. I had a vague yet clear sense that I needed to be in greater contact with the natural world. Now, my intellectual self was inclined to look for academic programs and environmental studies or outdoor recreation. But I already had one non-lucrative Master of Divinity degree, and I wasn't looking to form a collection. So eventually, I realized that somehow I was going to need to get a paying job using some mix of skills I already had. And it turned out that I did get a job with a well-respected wilderness therapy program in Utah. A wilderness therapy program is meant to support teenagers and young adults with drug and alcohol problems. They are also usually dealing with mental health or behavioral issues and problems with family and peers. But the clients themselves might not see it that way. So parents would often need to release their children into our custody in the middle of the night. So a 15-year-old might go to bed intoxicated in Connecticut and be on a flight to Las Vegas, our closest airport, before morning. But that wasn't my job. I was a field instructor. The kids would get driven several hours to the middle of nowhere to meet me and 3 other staff members and maybe 10 or so other teenagers in various stages of their 10 to 15-week stay. Outdoors. Yes, we camped outdoors all year round. I only did this for a year and a half. I'm not that hardcore. And I'd never backpacked in my life before this job. Our job as field instructors was to keep the clients safe and to facilitate their therapeutic assignments through work with hard skills like setting up camp, making a fire from a bow drill set, with whittling spoons to eat with, and soft skills to develop their psychological maturity and their personal responsibility. It was a grueling schedule. We were actively working from roughly 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 8 days. Then we'd get off for 6 days, then we'd go back into the field. I loved it. It was incredibly rigorous and immensely satisfying to work so closely with kids to help them find a way out of the tremendous pain they were in. One part of our daily schedule was called MFT, Mandatory Fun Time. Part of the company's therapeutic philosophy was that recreation is a necessary part of the day. It could never be taken away as a consequence for negative behavior. We could never run out of time and skip it, and the clients couldn't opt out. It was mandatory. So every day we would play some type of group game together. There was one game we played with hacky sacks called Pelt, and the teenage boy groups loved it. It was a real alpha male game. And if I remember it correctly, you dribble the hacky sack 3 times with your feet, and then after the 3rd contact, anybody could grab the hacky sack and fire it at somebody else. And if they didn't catch it, they'd get a strike. And after 3 strikes, they were out of the game. Now, I'm a really athletic person, but I was never a soccer player, and I had 0 experience with hacky sacks. So I'd get creamed. Always the first one out. And part of that was there was an unspoken strategy among the clients that everyone would try to eliminate the weakest players first. Well, first of all, I did not love losing. And secondly, I resented the gender association that it had in the male groups, who associated being weak with being female. Not that they invented that concept. But these teenage boys just loved eliminating this older female staff. So I started practicing playing hacky sack in my off shift. And over time, I started to get better. And then I started gaining respect in the male group for being a skillful player. I still always got eliminated, because it was always me against everyone else, but I wasn't always the first one anymore. Now as staff, we would get assigned to different groups, and there were times when I was assigned to young adult groups, which were co-ed. And the young adult groups could be the worst with this game because it would be male and female clients playing against each other. And there were so many disadvantages for the young women who were usually physically smaller. There were more guys than girls, and it took a certain killer instinct. So the guys could really exert their dominance over the chicks in this game. It was hard to watch because it mirrored and reinforced the imbalance in their personal lives that brought them into the wilderness in the first place. The overinflated patriarchal masculine and the underinflated, undervalued feminine. And I didn't know what to do. Certainly there was a more egalitarian culture most of the time. After all, some of the clients did describe this wilderness therapy program as a concentration camp run by hippies. But even so, the power imbalance in this game was vexing to me. So during the course of my time there, it so happened that one young adult group was developing more balance in numbers. And some of the young women, largely due to the severity of the issues they were dealing with, had extended stays well into 20 weeks. With a side effect being that their once pathetic pelt skills had increased significantly. And as their therapy progressed, they were developing more self-respect. One of the consequences being they were tired of getting whooped at this game. So one week, we were really representing well as women in the game. But outside the game, the guys were taking on a real superiority complex, which we were addressing the best way we could with our therapeutic tools. But on one of the last days of my shift, we were entrenched in a fierce pelt game. And the stakes were such that the women decided that they were going to form an alliance and defeat the men, which had never happened before. And as the game wore on, I realized there were several young women left, so there was a legitimate chance of winning. And as each young man was eliminated, the pressure mounted on the remaining guys to defend the superiority of manhood. Now, because the young women were so invested in this game and weren't giving up and getting bored like usual, it was running longer than normal. So much so that I was getting concerned that we wouldn't get to play the game to conclusion. And I was getting a growing sense in my belly that the women needed to win this game. All the weeks of practice, all the weeks of therapy, the turn of events that resulted in a balance of male to female clients. Some of the women would be finishing their therapy soon and happily leaving the group. No, we would not squander this opportunity. I began praying, God, I don't normally make demands, and I'm not even sure if it's allowed, but we have to win this game. Now, growing up playing sports, I was taught that you can pray for safe travel to the games, for physical safety in rigorous competition, for your highest quality performance, but it was considered poor taste to pray to win. That apparently was not God's domain. But I found myself praying, God, today winning is what matters. Today, it's not about trying our best. It is not about holding our heads high after a hard-fought defeat. Because as the saying goes, nothing succeeds like success. There is no amount of reassuring about equality and self-worth that I can do for these young women that would speak louder than winning this pelt game. It was for them. They needed to see themselves win this alpha male game. It was for the young men. They needed to experience the fierce boundary-setting feminine. It was for me. All the work with hard skills and soft skills that I had been doing during those many months, working to show up as an equal to my male counterparts when I had come in with no experience or wilderness skills, facing my conditioned sense of female inferiority. Sorry, not sorry, God. This game is for real, and I know how it has to end. So there is only one man remaining at this point, but he is the tallest and hulkiest of them all. And my staff team is calling to me, a couple more minutes, Amy Marie, then we need to start supper prep. Time was ticking. We have to win this time. I will not abide any other outcome. Regardless of how superficial or inconsequential it looks, this is a mystical moment. I will not stand for defeat. I am, in my gut, wordlessly summoning the powers of heaven and earth to intercede in this moment. Then one of the young women, not me, throws the hacky sack and hits the giant on the foot. It's his third strike, and he's out. We all freeze momentarily as we look around at each other, taking in the precedent that had just been set. Then we burst into shouting and triumphant hugging. We won, we won, we won, we did it. And all the men stand up from their elimination seating and start yelling back, "That's not the way this game is played. You can't win as a group. You can't stop playing until one person has won." "Then we're forfeiting the game," one woman said. "We don't need to beat each other." "If you don't play until there's one winner," one guy announced, "then the last man remaining before this group anarchy happened becomes the official winner." We looked around at each other. We'd never been in this situation before, and he had just made up that rule. Simultaneously, we broke into laughter and victory shouts. This was a day the dignity of the feminine was witnessed, and it would not be overruled. Not that day. Someone picked up the fallen hacky sack, and we all walked back to camp, giggles and grumbles filling the air. I looked up towards the sky. I didn't know what had just happened. Had I committed some kind of blasphemy, cheekily declaring divine will to God? Was that some kind of competitive ego in action? Or was it the incarnate will of God showing up as me? Was it a limited version of me insisting on being right? Or was it the cosmic me leading us into a shaking off of the illusion of second-class citizenship? Those are questions that required answers that I didn't have a psychological container for. But that day, something cracked open that made space for an entirely different paradigm. One where I could perceive myself as an equal, no more, no less than anyone else. One where I could feel into being an inherent part of God, of life, of love, of truth, along with everyone else. That the divine is all there is, however it's packaged. And that divine authority rests within us, in the kingdom of God at our core. And it must eventually be embodied. But when you're living with a deep sense of human shame or sin or separation, there's no way to merge with the divine realms. So then the body becomes a prison, and your own senses are untrustworthy. And if you can't trust yourself to know what's true, there's only the authority that comes from the outside. And all that God can be is an external source of everything you don't have. It is a lie that it's even possible to be separate from the divine. It is a lie. And our job at this point is to look at any thought, any behavior, any internal dialogue that would suggest otherwise, and to release it into the fullness it came from. Its task is completed. We are moving into a new world. As I sat with a message this week, because I'm my own first audience, I had a sense that there was an opportunity for me to let go of another thread of external authority. You might have heard me say last month that I never got ordained because I never found a denomination or group that represented truth and love as I knew it, and I wasn't willing to say things that didn't ring true for me. As I sat with this sermon, I recognized that this has become a convenient dilemma. There's a passage in the Gospel of Thomas that says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And this story of not being ordained has become a hiding place. Because inside of me is a creative force which I have a personal responsibility to embody. And what I know now is that owning that divine power, honoring it, employing it, giving myself to it, is entirely under my jurisdiction. I realized this week that I don't need anyone in an official position to tell me that I am here to love with my whole being, to speak words of truth and reconciliation, to play and laugh and cry, to write and create and heal, and to help transform this world from the inside of me out. To sit with my fears that would have me believe I am separate, I am less than, I am more than, I am not enough, I am too much, that my worth is contingent on anything. So on this day, I invite you to my service of ordination. On this day, Sunday, December 2nd, I say to you by the power vested in me, I take my rightful place in this world, in service to truth and beauty and love and freedom, to create and express from the divine power within me, with my heart and soul and mind and strength. I offer the fullness of who I am to traverse the unknown for the purpose of making visible the power and dignity and equality of all creation. I vow to live at the intersection of heaven and earth for my good and the well-being of all. This is not the end of feeling shame or doubt or fear, but it is the end of pretending that I don't know why I'm here. Hallelujah. Through the advent of divine authority, another prodigal child has regained her feral city and is facing in the direction of home. Amen.
Amen.